Grogu.
Within the last 46 years, Star Wars has more than established its place in the world and pop culture as we know it. While its popularity has fluctuated through the decades, Star Wars is one of those things that is so popular that certain parts of it are recognizable by people who have never seen an entire Star Wars movie. And through the years, as more and more projects were released in the franchise, that recognizability became even bigger. When someone says the word Star Wars, a majority of people will have something that comes to mind. Things like the iconic villain with breathing issues, or the princess with cinnamon rolls on her head. On social media, people may recognize Star Wars from memes such as,
"Hello there,
General Kenobi.
I don't think the system works."
Wow. What do you know?
Others may simply recognize the lightsaber or the sound it makes when it clashes with another. But this day and age, Star Wars can pretty much universally be recognized by one singular creature. Something so little, yet so impactful and cute that your mom even posted about it on Facebook. And that is of course the one and only baby Grogu. Grogu. In just over 3 years, how can a 50-year-old baby become the face of a nearly 50-year-old franchise? What about a baby from Yoda's species resonates so heavily with the world? And finally, what does this bundle of force power mean for the Star Wars franchise? Today, we will be taking a look into the world of Grogu and how a creature standing at just 33 centimeters tall took over the world. Following the success of the first Star Wars film in 1977, it was clear that this story was a huge success, and audiences demanded more from a galaxy far, far away. Luckily, the creator George Lucas had already been toying with the idea of this story spanning out across multiple films, starting with one trilogy. However, George Lucas would find himself in a dilemma after Star Wars' release. In the film, we meet Luke Skywalker, the young main character who was gifted with the ability to wield the Force, but did not discover this until he was 19 years old, making him inexperienced. Luke Skywalker would need to train to reach his full potential as a Force user and Jedi Knight, especially now that Luke's journey would continue on for at least 2 more movies. The issue was that in that first film, the only other Jedi Master we meet was killed off in a triumphant duel with his former apprentice, Darth Vader. This was a decision George Lucas would make in the 3rd week of filming, before the idea of multiple movies was fully developed. Obi-Wan Kenobi was meant to train Luke Skywalker in the ways of the Force before his untimely passing, and though Obi-Wan could be brought back and live on via Force Ghost, this was not enough to train the next Jedi prodigy. George Lucas had no choice but to introduce a brand new Jedi Master that, like Obi-Wan Kenobi, would live on past the mysterious disappearance of the prior Jedi Order and would be able to train Luke Skywalker in the ways of the Force. And that is where Jedi Master Yoda was born. The concept for this new Jedi Master could go anywhere, and the possibilities were truly endless. But from the very beginning, George knew 3 things. One is that this character would be someone who taught Obi-Wan Kenobi in the ways of the Force. 2 was that he would be the all-powerful Jedi, perhaps even the most powerful. And 3 was that this character would be the exact opposite of what you'd expect from this uber Jedi. This is where George decided to continue a great tradition in mythological storytelling, where the protagonist would stumble upon someone who seemed small and insignificant, but would actually be the master, or the most significant part of the hero's journey. So George brought on concept artist Joe Johnston to start designing the character of Yoda, and the direction Joe was given would be a smaller creature that would seem out of the ordinary. Joe Johnston would make many designs before he created something George was happy with, but would ultimately land on a design that George Lucas described to have baby features with big eyes, big ears, and would be small and somewhat cute. Though the concept was still just a vague idea, and the design was still evolving based on the basic concept. It would not take long for George to develop the personality of Yoda either, as from the very first script, he was a funny creature who would have funny moments, all while speaking backwards. George was very adamant on having Yoda be the way he originally wrote him, which was something that Lawrence Kasdan challenged and considered nonsense when he was brought on board to do rewrites for The Empire Strikes Back. So they came to a compromise, and Lawrence Kasdan brought a purpose to the way Yoda spoke. It would be a way to engage the audience with the dialogue being spoken, because you have to figure out what he is saying by putting it together in your head. This was important because Yoda not only taught Luke Skywalker important life lessons, but the audience as well, such as not limiting yourself by what you think you are capable of. George understood that typical motivational speeches could be boring and hard to grasp, especially for children, So this was a great way to make these things much more meaningful and actually stick with the audience. And this proved to be 100% successful, because not only did Yoda become insanely popular once the film was released, but so did many of his lines in the film. On top of seeing Yoda plastered on all sorts of merchandise like bumper stickers, t-shirts, action figures, and grapes, you also see iconic lines like "do or do not, there is no try" all over the world. The final version of Yoda that was brought to the screen was done so by a group of many talented people led by creature designer Stuart Freeborn, who would also base his design on that original vague idea Joe Johnston had set out. On this team as well was Nick Maley and Wendy Medener, who had experience working on the Muppets. They knew immediately that Yoda would be brought to life by a puppet, and so it was just a matter of executing that in a way that would also seem realistic enough to fit into live action. It took the team 4 months of sculpting and resculpting various Yoda puppets before they were happy with the final design. It was in this process that the team got the idea of including features of Albert Einstein, with white frizzy hair, and including wrinkles that resembled Stuart Freeborn's. The design of Yoda that this team created became iconic and instantly recognizable to the world. What is great about Star Wars, especially in the early films, is that when one character with a different alien design is introduced, that creates an entire alien species, with the possibility of new stories that expand on the lore of these aliens. So for example, we first meet Chewbacca in A New Hope, who is the first member we meet of the Wookiee species, and then immediately see more members of the Wookiee species in the following year's Star Wars The Holiday Special. And now we see the Wookiee home planet of Kashyyyk in all sorts of different projects with various members of the Wookiee species. However, for Yoda's species, this was not the case for a while, and even today, his species is a very rare case in the franchise. For starters, you'll notice that this entire time, I have only referred to that species as Yoda's species, and that is because in the 43 years since Yoda's introduction, his species has never once been named. Not in any movie or TV show or even any book, comic, expanded guide, you name it. It has only ever been referred to as Yoda's species, and we have gotten almost no information on the species as a whole. There is no known home planet or even many known members of the species. The only thing we have are things we need to know, like how they can live for at least 900 years. But across all movies, books, video games, and comics at the time, we would not see another member of Yoda's species until 1999's The Phantom Menace, where we are introduced to a female member of the species named Yaddle. Yaddle sat on the Jedi Council alongside Master Yoda during the Republic era, and has appeared in many expanded universe stories, and most recently, the 2022 animated series Tales of the Jedi. Yaddle is definitely the most expanded on member of Yoda's species, besides Yoda himself, and in canon, Yoda, Yaddle, and Grogu are the only known members of this species. However, in stories that would now be considered legends or non-canon, we see members of Yoda's species like Vandar Tokar and Oteg from the Old Republic video games and comics, and Jedi Knight Minch, who appeared in the comic Star Wars Tales issue 16. While all of these characters get to have amazing stories and many appearances, none of them have ever revolved around the lore of the species. This is because George Lucas never actually created a backstory for the character. As I mentioned previously, the only reason Yoda was created was to fill that mentor role for Luke Skywalker, so when he was first introduced, there was no reason to have a backstory, and instead of creating one, George stayed consistent with the fact that Yoda's species will forever be a mystery, and will never be named in any Star Wars media. Since Disney has bought Star Wars, they have kept up this wish of George's to not disclose any details on the mysterious species from a galaxy far, far away, or rather not create any details, as there are none that actually exist. While we have not and hopefully will not get a name, we have gotten more insight into how Yoda's species ages differently than humans, and this is done through the eyes of a child. The child. When Jon Favreau was brought on to create a Star Wars series, the first thing he set out to do was not only be inspired by the Star Wars franchise, but also the things that inspired George Lucas when he first created Star Wars. For George, one of his biggest influences was samurai films, specifically films from Japanese filmmaker Akira Kurosawa. The film he took the most inspiration from was The Hidden Fortress, with things like Obi-Wan being based on Makabe Rokuroda, or a princess leading the rebellion, or even something as minuscule as the wipe transitions. So when Jon Favreau set out to be inspired by the same things as George, samurai films were a huge influence for him too, and he chose the story of Lone Wolf and Cub. Lone Wolf and Cub was originally a manga series by Kazuo Koike that later became a film series, which focuses on a shogun executioner whose wife was killed after a power grab by a local clan. This forces him into the life of a rogue assassin, but he still has his son to take care of. However, this lifestyle brings them to be put on trial for treason. But when the father gives his son a choice between a kid's toy and a sword, he chooses the sword to forge a path of redemption and vengeance. There are a lot of elements in this story that we are seeing play out with Grogu. We are first introduced to the Mandalorian in episode 1, who is a bounty hunter with questionable morals and a personal feeling of unimportance. The first scene we see of Din Djarin is him ruthlessly killing a few guys in a cantina in order to take in one singular bounty. But this all changes when a child is brought into his hands that he must take care of. He breaks away from the Bounty Hunters Guild and even fights against it in order to protect the child that is now in his possession. And we have seen how these two characters have developed over 2 seasons of The Mandalorian and in the spin-off The Book of Boba Fett. We even recently saw the parallel with the Lone Wolf and Cub, with the child choosing between a lightsaber representing his past life and potential future as a Jedi, or his very own Beskar armor that represents his new life as a Mandalorian foundling. And obviously we know he chose the armor, which is leading to him being by Din Djarin's side as he sets out to forge a new path for Mandalore. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We will talk about all my predictions for Grogu's future a bit later on. The very first time the idea of Grogu was documented was at the end of Jon Favreau's script for the first episode of The Mandalorian. It's a baby, the same race as Yoda, and it's smiling up at them. It seems as though from the very first draft, Jon knew that a baby of Yoda's species would fill the role of the Cub in the Lone Wolf and Cub storyline. After reading the script, executive producer Dave Filoni immediately did a quick drawing of what that final scene could look like, with the Mandalorian looking into a carrier that held Grogu. This sketch went over to Doug Chiang, an artist who worked with Lucasfilm since the prequels, and has since worked his way up to vice president and executive creative director of Lucasfilm. He would begin work on not only the design of Grogu, but his carrier, keeping the same shape that Dave Filoni first thought of that would later become so iconic. And of course, because Grogu is the same species as Yoda, designing this little green guy would be much easier, as they had the wonderful work of Stuart Freeborn's team to work off of. But that did not mean there weren't any obstacles in the way, and Grogu would still see various designs before one was actually finalized. We had never seen a child of Yoda's species before, and so there were a million factors to take into consideration, like deciding which elements of Yoda's design would still be seen in a child. For Jon Favreau, he knew that he wanted to keep the big eyes and ears that Yoda had. This was because Jon had just finished working on a VR game titled Gnomes and Goblins, where the faces of the goblins are not very expressive, but through the eyes and ears you get so much emotion. One of my favorite elements that they kept in was Yoda's appearance in age. Yoda has always looked extremely old, and before Grogu, it was assumed that it was due to him being over 900 years old. And while that is still somewhat the case, through Grogu we actually learn that their species just kinda looks old from the start. I mean, Grogu is a child with a receding hairline and white hair, but somehow it fits so well. Through concept art, they tried so many different elements for the character. Some were extremely cute, some were ugly, some had smooth skin, others had wrinkles. There is even this one that lives in my nightmares to this day. Using the concepts, Jon and Dave slowly zeroed in on what the child could look like, until finally they reached one final design. Chris Alsman would come up with a version of the character that included the big eyes and ears that Jon wanted all along. Jon says they found it charming, and there was something about the way the character presented itself that drew them into it. And from there, this design would be the rallying image of the character used in all other concept art. And even after the design was finalized, they still had to work with it, because the first sculptures of Grogu would not look nearly as cute as the original picture. It wasn't until the talented team at Legacy Effects came in that the design could actually be brought to life. Legacy worked 3 months to build an insanely realistic animatronic puppet of the child that literally felt like it had a mind of its own. According to Adam Pally, the guy who played the scout trooper that punched Grogu, the puppet cost $5 million to make. But those $5 million really show in just how realistic this puppet is. This was in part because of the great design of the puppet, but also the group of talented puppeteers who would bring him to life. It is insane to think that a majority of facial expressions Grogu makes are 100% practical and done from a remote control. And anytime that there is a CGI version of Grogu used, according to Jon Favreau, they never use CGI for things that the puppet can't actually do. This puppet was so realistic that the crew members and actors would get so lost in the magic that they'd forget he was just a puppet. Actors would handle him with care as if he was an actual baby. This was also because the puppeteers would still control Grogu in between scenes, with the baby reacting to the people around him. So Grogu was basically just another actor on set, with his own personality. Even the makeup artist and costume designers talked to Grogu like he was a real baby. Deborah Chow, a director on season 1, recalls a time when Werner Herzog actually directed the puppet during a scene, telling him directly what to try for the scene in order to act off of each other. He got so lost in the scene that he forgot it was a puppet, which made his performance with the baby that much more impressive. The Grogu puppet was a huge technological advancement, and while the technology developed so much, they still used old school techniques for it that were used on The Empire Strikes Back, with Grogu's hands and body still being controlled manually. During filming of The Mandalorian in 2018, Grogu's name hadn't even been revealed to the directors or crew on the series. He was simply known as Baby on set, and even now that his name has been revealed, they have kept this nickname during filming. But characters not having names in this show is no obscure thing, in fact, quite the opposite. Even the main character Din Djarin was not named until the final episode of season 1. He was instead referred to as the Mandalorian, just like Werner Herzog's character's name was the Client, or Mando's Bounty in episode 1 is just called the Mythrol. And up until season 2 episode 5 of The Mandalorian, Baby Yoda was simply called the Child in the show. However, this would not stick, because as soon as he was brought to people's screens, he would forever be known as Baby Yoda. Picture this, it's November 12th, 2019, and you just downloaded Disney Plus for the first time. There you see nearly every movie that Disney owns, including all of Star Wars on 4K for the first time. You see all the Marvel movies and a groundbreaking original series that dropped the same exact day. High School Musical, the series. Wait, the other groundbreaking original series, The Mandalorian. Before the series was released, marketing didn't give anything away except a few details, like how the Mandalorian is a bounty hunter and that we would encounter some interesting characters. We watch as that shiny armored bounty hunter took a new job looking for a 50-year-old bounty that was extremely important to the client of the Bounty Hunter Guild, who turned out to be connected to the Empire. We see that he joins forces with an IG unit droid IG-11, not to be confused with legendary bounty hunter IG-88.
Who does Taika Waititi play in The Mandalorian? I play a bounty hunter droid called IG-88. Who does Taika Waititi play in The Mandalorian? IG-11, of course.
And at the end of the episode is where everything changed. It all made sense why they didn't market much from the show. They simply couldn't, because the show would revolve around this surprise. We got our first look at the cute but gremlin-looking baby in a scene that brought to life Dave Filoni's original pencil sketch. There he was in all his glory, a child with no name. And from then on out, I was immediately sold on the idea. For some, the reveal of Baby Yoda at the end was spoiled for them. But for me, I was someone who watched the very second I could, and was shocked by what I had seen. Something so familiar, yet so different, and it would change Star Wars forever. The Mandalorian was a huge success. According to The Hollywood Reporter, an estimated 16.73 million people watched the entire first season of The Mandalorian. And mind you, this was when Disney Plus first released and only had 26.5 million subscribers. This means that 63% of people who subscribed to Disney Plus in the first 7 weeks of its release watched the entire first season. But what drew people to this series? Well, of course the fans of Star Wars watched the series, but The Mandalorian reached out to way more than just Star Wars fans. It brought in a huge amount of people from the general audience as well. But how? As a huge fan of the story of The Mandalorian, I wish I could say that it is what drew people into that first episode, though the quality of the story is a big reason people stuck around. It wasn't because beloved characters from the Star Wars franchise were returning in this series, like how Harrison, Carrie, and Mark returning in the sequels carried that hype. It was because of, well, who else could it be? Imagine I sat here all this time talking about Grogu just to say it was because of someone else. Yes, obviously Baby Yoda took the world by storm. He was everywhere, and talked about by everyone, whether it was to talk about how cute he was, or because of the countless memes that were created because of him. Overnight, Baby Yoda became a pop culture icon, and nearly everyone had heard about him. But how did this happen? What appealed to the masses with Baby Yoda? How did The Mandalorian become the Baby Yoda show in the eyes of the general audience? Adorable baby versions of characters are nothing new in film and TV, and neither is the popularity surrounding them. We've seen characters like Baby Grinch seen in Jim Carrey's The Grinch, or Baby Groot from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, but none of them did it like Baby Yoda. Part of this is due to the fact that not only is Yoda a popular character, even to a general audience, but his design is already rooted in baby-like features, as George Lucas said before. His cuteness played a huge part in why he became so popular. Grogu falls under what is called baby schema, which is a concept coined by Conrad Lorenz, who explains that people find humans, or in this case aliens, cute because of features like large eyes, a small nose, a small chin, but a large head for their little body. As you can see, Grogu has all of these, so we are instantly attached to him and the childlike wonder these features bring. And when something is cute, we all know what that means for the world. I mean, just look at what happened when people found Minions cute in Despicable Me. 13 years later and we have yet to recover. And now instead of your mom just posting Minion memes on Facebook, she's posting Grogu ones as well. But hey, it's Star Wars, so give her a free pass. But I mean, cute creatures and babies were nothing new to the Star Wars franchise either. Like in the Clone Wars movie, we meet a baby Hutt, or in 1983 we were introduced to the Ewoks on the forest moon of Endor, which were basically just walking teddy bears. While the Ewoks were known to be a hated on element at first, there was enough love to carry an entire stuffed animal toy line, 2 live-action movies, and an animated series. Star Wars capitalized off the Ewoks with merchandise. However, this comes as no surprise for a franchise that has such a huge merchandising history, with Star Wars toys being a huge success all throughout the franchise's existence. And you'd think that that would be the case for Baby Yoda, right? I mean, he was such an instant success and comes from the Star Wars franchise. Baby Yoda merchandise must have been the big craze when The Mandalorian released, right? But no, it wasn't available. At first, there was 0 officially licensed merchandise. This was because, as I mentioned before, the reveal of Baby Yoda was a total surprise. Franchises like Star Wars and Marvel tend to have leaks that come from toys that are released during the movie. Even if toys are slated to release shortly after the initial release, it takes close to a year to put a toy into production and onto shelves. And during that year, anyone who got their hands on it could easily upload it to social media, and if that happened for Grogu, the initial surprise would be ruined. So instead, Baby Yoda rose to fame through another route, which was word of mouth. The biggest thing that can make any movie, TV series, or media in general successful is simply people recommending it to other people. This is how series like Stranger Things became popular, or recent movies such as Top Gun Maverick or Puss in Boots. These are all movies and series that, if it weren't for word of mouth, would not have become so successful. But they were. One person watches and then tells their parents to go watch, and then they love it too, so they recommend it to their coworker, who recommends it to her child, who decides to post their thoughts about it on social media. And for Grogu, that is exactly what happened, and a lot of it actually took place on social media. Because that puppet was so expressive, thanks to the talented people mentioned before, there were so many moments that were quickly turned into memes. You saw the memes of Baby Yoda sipping tea, or the ones about Chicky Nuggies. People got super creative, and even celebrities were talking about Baby Yoda, like The Rock. It was also at this time, at the end of 2019, that the social media platform TikTok started to become popular. And Star Wars was a huge part of that, both because of The Mandalorian and The Rise of Skywalker, which was coming out at that time too. People made video after video about Grogu on TikTok, but this meant that people were talking about something Star Wars, which was great for the franchise. Especially because of the age demographic of TikTok, this is also when a lot of the younger generation came into the Star Wars fandom. Something that Jon Favreau has proudly talked about is how The Mandalorian brought in a new audience to Star Wars. Part of this is because The Mandalorian's first season is a great entry point into the franchise. It is a self-contained story about characters we have never met, and is almost like a sampler for what Star Wars can be. So for example, someone may have seen a TikTok about Baby Yoda and decided to tune into The Mandalorian on Disney Plus without having seen anything Star Wars. In this show, they would get exactly what was promised: cute, funny, and epic moments with Baby Yoda. But on top of that, they would receive a compelling story that took a ton of elements of Star Wars, but not too much to where this new audience could not follow along. So this new audience member also sees things like Tatooine and speeder bikes, or even an X-Wing pilot for the first time. So they decide to watch the other movies, which are all conveniently on Disney Plus. But oh, what was that about a Darksaber at the end of the finale? Or what is the history behind these helmeted warriors called Mandalorians? Oh damn, there is an entire animated series that focuses on just that? So now they are watching the Clone Wars for the first time, which leads to Star Wars Rebels, and suddenly they are a huge superfan, tuning into the next season of the Manda. Is that Ahsoka Tano in live action? Suddenly moments like that became exciting for them too, just like it was for those of us who watched the Clone Wars and Rebels back when they were released. It was all part of a strategic plan by Jon Favreau. Also, I have to laugh at the idea of someone seeing a TikTok and thinking Baby Yoda meant the actual Yoda, just to find out the series actually takes 5 years after Yoda's death, and he is just called that because George Lucas demanded Yoda's species never be revealed. Welcome to the Star Wars fandom, folks. And you'd be surprised just how many people in the online fandom nowadays came from The Mandalorian, which means Grogu holds a special place in their heart for being the first thing that introduced them to Star Wars. And that is a big reason why he so easily became the current face of the Star Wars franchise. His story is one of the most compelling things in Star Wars, not just currently, but also of all time. People are dying to know what is next for our 50-year-old little guy. The other day, my grandma asked me excitedly after watching the season 3 trailer if Baby Yoda was fighting someone. My grandma hasn't even seen the show, but she loves him from the little tidbits she has heard and seen. Eventually, Grogu would see a wide release and the demand would finally be met for Grogu toys, plushies, Funko Pops, Lego, and so much more. But this wasn't until after the Disney company lost out on a nearly $3 million profit by not releasing Grogu merch. While companies like Hasbro and Funko take the better part of a year to put an item on shelves, unofficial merchandise sellers needed 48 hours and a lifetime supply of pillow stuffing. According to Jungle Scout, a company that works with Amazon merchants on sales, unofficial merchandise would generate an estimated $3 million, with each piece of merchandise averaging at $23 a pop. And that was just Amazon, where it is harder to sell unlicensed merchandise. But for a site like Etsy, fan-made merchandise thrives, and we can only assume that Grogu merch was insanely successful, considering just how many items were available on Etsy. It was also in 2019 that Hasbro's Star Wars toys were underperforming, causing Hasbro a slowdown on Star Wars merchandising altogether. But thanks to Grogu, they would see a 21% increase in toy sales in 2020, according to their own report, and Disney would be able to exceed well past the $3 million that they missed out on. In 2020, Grogu merchandise would be the top-selling children's gift for Christmas, beating out things like the PS5. A 7.5-inch doll beat out the PlayStation 5. And because Season 2 would release in October 2020, and they didn't have to keep Grogu's involvement a secret, they made sure to hit the shelves hard for that 2020 holiday season that lined up with Season 2. Grogu was also the top-selling toy on Amazon in both 2020 and 2021, and this Grogu Pop is the most pre-ordered Funko Pop that the company has ever seen. There are now countless variants of Grogu Funko Pops, with a giant version even making an appearance in last year's Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade. It is wild to think that there was a time that Grogu merchandise wasn't available, especially because of how quickly he became a pop culture icon. Nowadays, you see this kid everywhere, and there is no plan to stop the Grogu world domination anytime soon. In order to theorize as to what the future of Grogu could hold, we first have to take a look back at what we know about the kid's story so far, combining all the tidbits we get from both seasons of The Mandalorian, as well as the Book of Boba Fett. We for starters know that Grogu is a Force-sensitive being just like every other member of Yoda's species, and that he was trained at the Jedi Temple on Coruscant by many masters in the about 20 years he would have spent there. But of course, this was disrupted by the worst tragedy in Star Wars, Order 66, a massacre where the clone army of the Republic would be ordered to turn against their Jedi generals, killing nearly every Jedi by doing so. But Grogu survived this, as we see in the Book of Boba Fett. In fact, he was in the same place as Anakin Skywalker in the 501st Legion during Order 66. But as for who saved him from the temple or what happened after, we don't really know. Grogu's mind is filled with either darkness or emptiness in place of those memories, hinting at a potential dark point in Grogu's life before he'd eventually be saved by the Mandalorian. Personally, I am on the train that Barriss Offee saved Grogu from the temple. In the Book of Boba Fett Order 66 flashbacks, you can see a crest on the wall that looks similar to the one belonging to Barriss Offee. This could also explain why Grogu had a dark period of his life, as alongside Barriss, he may have dove into the dark side of the Force a bit. At the very least, if he was with Barriss, he would have been surrounded by the dark side. And as we know, Grogu can tend to have dark side tendencies. He force chokes Cara Dune, and even in the Mandalorian Season 3 trailer, he seems to be using the dark side to fight the Beast. But I don't think that those things are leading to a full turn to the dark side, instead just a tease that at one point he may have learned to tap into the dark. I also think that with the Ahsoka series coming soon, it may be good to add Barriss Offee to the mix, as her and Ahsoka's storylines never really got to be wrapped up from the Clone Wars. If she lived, she could make an interesting antagonist for the series, though I think she'd have to be done right, with a lot of nuance, as I still have a lot of mixed feelings about how her character was handled in the Clone Wars. But really, anyone could have saved Grogu, even a character we may have never seen before. One interesting theory I saw recently was from Star Wars YouTuber Scotty Holiday, where they theorized that Tera Sinube could have been the one to save Grogu from the temple. The video actually convinced me that Tera Sinube might actually have been the one, so I definitely recommend checking it out. It'll be linked in the description and the cards. When we first meet Grogu, he is simply a bounty for Din Djarin to pick up and deliver to a client for an extremely big reward. And while Din Djarin definitely contemplated what to do, and even went as far to give Grogu up to the client, he did end up saving Grogu and keeping him as his own. But Din Djarin was in no place to be a father when he first took on the role, as he lived the life of a killer and capturer in order to make money. But Grogu would change Din Djarin's entire perspective on life, giving him something to care about in the galaxy other than surviving. But Din would still struggle on what to do with the child. The Empire was after Grogu before, but now that a lone bounty hunter stole him back, he'd become an even bigger target. They want to use Grogu's DNA for some sort of cloning experiment, presumably a part of the Palpatine and Snoke storyline in the sequels. Din Djarin would have to keep him safe from the Empire. Din also knew from first-hand experience that foundlings were a part of Mandalorian culture. You may not have been born into Mandalore, but if you are a child found by the Mandalorians, you are a Mandalorian foundling, and that is exactly what Din and Grogu were. Din Djarin was found by the Watch, while Grogu was found by Din Djarin. However, this would be a very rare case, as the foundling in possession of Din Djarin was part of
an order of sorcerers called Jedi.
The Mandalorians and the Jedi have been at war with each other, for simply not understanding each other. This is where Mandalorians would start to wear armor and use weapons specifically meant to combat the Jedi, that blocked lightsabers and kept them protected from Force-related attacks. So the armorer who led Din Djarin's tribe would order him to return Grogu to his people, the enemy sorcerers. This began the journey of Din Djarin having to return this child, in which he was grown super attached to, back to a group that was close to non-existent at this point. What went from a simple job that Din took in exchange for a hefty amount of Beskar became his actual child, and letting go would not be easy for either of them. This is where Din would meet Bo-Katan, which led him to Ahsoka Tano, a former Jedi from the Clone Wars. It was here that Din learned that the connection he had with Grogu was mutual, but that this would actually affect Grogu's training. For the Jedi, attachments are forbidden, and younglings usually started training before they were old enough to make long-lasting attachments to someone. For Ahsoka, her Jedi Master, Anakin Skywalker, turned to the dark side for what she believes to be issues with attachments. So Ahsoka refused to train Grogu altogether. This led Grogu to the Seeing Stone, where he would call out to a Jedi to potentially train him in the ways of the Force. And while it was here that he got the attention of Luke Skywalker himself, Grogu was captured by the Empire. Din Djarin would have to recruit Bo-Katan, which worked out because she was after Moff Gideon, who wielded the Darksaber, who just so happened to be the person holding Grogu captive. And they were successful in saving Grogu from the Empire, so that he could go off with Luke Skywalker to train in the ways of the Force. And though it was difficult, Din Djarin was able to let go, at least in that moment, to do what he thought was best for Grogu. But it was here that Din would accidentally become the literal ruler of Mandalore. Din Djarin fought Moff Gideon before Bo-Katan had the chance, and Din was successful in not only beating him, but disarming him as well. What Din Djarin didn't know was that what he did is exactly how you become the rightful ruler of the Darksaber, by winning it in combat. And whoever wields the Darksaber is the rightful ruler of Mandalore. From here we jump to the Book of Boba Fett, where we see that Grogu is training with Luke Skywalker. But this is cut short because Grogu is still attached to Din Djarin. Luke gave Grogu the choice between Yoda's lightsaber or his very own Beskar armor to embrace the fact that he is a foundling. If he chose the saber, he would train in the ways of the Force with Luke and become the first student of Luke's Jedi Temple. If he chose the Beskar, he would be sent back with Din Djarin, and as we know, he chose to return to his father. This is where I think Grogu is going to become a huge key player in this new version of Mandalore. As we know, Mandalore is completely destroyed, and Bo-Katan is attempting to salvage what is left and bounce back from the destruction and loss. or should I say the many destruction and losses through the years. But now that she isn't the leader, what happens next? Will Din Djarin rule Mandalore and attempt to rebuild it himself, or will Bo-Katan beat him in combat so that she can take the throne and do it herself? We will have to wait and see in Season 3, though I really hope Din Djarin takes on the reluctant hero role and that he is somewhat forced to rule Mandalore. I think he is exactly what Mandalore needs, someone who is slowly falling out of the idea of tradition which splits the Mandalorians apart, and is just looking to unite everyone under Mandalore. But the thing is that Din is only human, and his lifespan won't last very long. But Grogu, being a part of Yoda's species, has up to 900 years ahead of him. He could grow up and become the ruler of Mandalore when the time comes, and since he is both Jedi and Mandalorian, this would unite the corner of the galaxy in a way that hasn't been seen for generations. But no matter what, Grogu is going to be the future of Star Wars, not only because he will live so long, but because he is so likable as well. He could encounter characters like Rey and Finn after the sequel trilogy, or take us even further beyond. All I know is that if there is an episode 10 and Grogu is not involved, I will be rioting. But these are all just my thoughts on the future of this newfound Jedi Mandalorian. The rise of Grogu has only just begun, with the new season of The Mandalorian coming in just 1 month, and another on the way. And we can't forget the ever-expanding Mandoverse, with both Ahsoka and Skeleton Crew releasing this year. I truly think Grogu is the future of Star Wars, with Jon Favreau even teasing the fact that Grogu is a character that could live on for hundreds of years and does not need to be replaced by children and grandchildren in order for his legacy to continue. Grogu has completely changed the game when it comes to Star Wars in so many different departments, whether it be the marketing and merchandise, or the connected storytelling between TV shows that we are seeing from a galaxy far, far away. For a character with so much going for him since his debut, it is no wonder he became such a huge success in pop culture. From the memes, to the great story, to the Funko Pops, to the float in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, Grogu is a total treasure to the Star Wars franchise. During this upcoming season of The Mandalorian, remember to appreciate Grogu for how far he has come and how far he will go. I mean seriously, he went from being helpless in a carrier to sharing the screen with a young Luke Skywalker in the year 2022. That is legendary status and is 100% the way. Thank you for tuning in to another one of my video essays. If you missed the last one, which is the first one I ever made, make sure to click the link in the description and check it out. Thank you all so much for your support, and make sure to let me know in the comments what you think of Grogu and where you could see him going in the future. Until next time, may the Force be with you always, and SWE out.